Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Well, you have directed the multi-series, the 4-part series of The Dinosaurs, which was executive produced by Spielberg, if I've got that correct. And that seemed to be a total success, a phenomenal production by you guys. Had 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. It was like, I think it was the second most watched series on the entire planet that week. And it was like just behind Bridgerton or something like that. I could be getting that wrong.
We actually were above Bridgerton.
Oh, amazing.
I think it was 70, we're in 70 countries in the number one spot. That's not me bragging, it's just the reality. So yeah, no, it absolutely captured the world's imagination.
Yeah, amazing, like beautiful. And they say it was like, I believe I read it was like 10 million views in its first week or something like phenomenal like that. So you've been for 2 decades, I believe, in the big leagues when it comes to the production, but a large portion of that was done by you navigating this without knowing the brain that was directing all of these amazing projects. I'd be curious to kind of like start there, take us back to those early days on set, maybe before the big productions, when you didn't necessarily know how your brain worked, but you knew it was maybe a little bit different. What was that like for you?
It's interesting. When I started off in the business, I was a single sort of camera director. So I'd often be doing documentary on my own, and that worked really well. But as my career sort of progressed and the productions got bigger, more and more sort of people were under my management when you're, directing a multi-team crew. And I think that's when I started to realize that I operate quite well on my own and I struggle often with, lots and lots of people. And so, but the question is, when did I start to realize my brain was wired slightly differently? I think probably way back, even when I was at school. I had a school reunion not long ago, and I hadn't seen a couple of the guys there for like 40 odd years. And they said, "Oh, I remember you, Nick. You were the space cadet," because I was off in this other world. And they said that I was just a bit different. And I wasn't engaged in the same way, and I used to get very hyper and rush around, which I don't remember, but they remember it really well. So I think even back then, ADHD wasn't even a thing back then, 40 years ago. Yeah, go back to the question again. Sorry, I've gone off. I've got distracted.
That's totally fine. This is the space to do so. I'm just curious, like you've mentioned there, obviously, at school, and that reunion, like other people were maybe able to notice this within yourself. But are you saying that you didn't necessarily at that point realize that there was something different that was going on upstairs for you, or your experience of the world was slightly different?
I suppose I struggled academically massively. So in that sense, and it's because I was, if something didn't stimulate me, I just wouldn't engage with it. And so I barely got into my secondary school. So at that point, but I knew I wasn't really stupid because I did well on the IQ scores, but academically I really struggled. And so I think that's when I sort of felt that there was something, and back then I thought there was something wrong with me. You think, why can't I sort of do the work like everyone else? And so you're sort of forming this picture, and it's quite a negative picture back in the day when all of these things weren't really talked about. So I think those first few years, certainly through my teenage years, were tough.
I totally resonate with that as well, for likely different reasons. Where when I was at school, that's the reason why I asked that question. I kind of had I was acutely aware that my experience was different to everyone else's. Like I felt almost like permanently dissatisfied with like the schooling system and my environment and things like that. But there was, in the same breath, like I knew I was capable. And I found that incredibly difficult to navigate personally, because like you say, at that point there were no words for me to actually use to help articulate like how I felt. I was just like, I would vocalize this to myself. This is, I talk about this all the time. This was like a prevalent thing for me. I would say to myself out loud, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like in many different scenarios when like something seemingly simple would feel incredibly difficult to do. And yet equally something that is maybe objectively a lot more complex, I could fixate on and hyper-focus on and spend an inordinate amount of time doing and be very creative. And, I had these big ambitions. But yeah, I just found it very difficult to be able to navigate because it didn't look like through my eyes that anybody else was kind of experiencing that either. Was there anybody around you now, if you look back, that you felt was similar to you at that time that you did maybe gravitate towards? And that could be someone you knew, or even just like someone that you were inspired by.
Yeah, it's interesting because I did I was sort of drawn to music. I did a lot of music, and I sang in a cathedral choir. And for me, that was almost like a release because, you're surrounded, people who are musicians are often, neurodiverse. And I think amongst the fellow musicians, there were definitely people who were similar to me. So I think for me, that was my sort of beginning of finding my tribe. But outside of that, when I was in the main school doing sport, doing rugby, all of those things I really struggled with because I just didn't get the communication. I was really struggled to do set tasks. And I think it's that sort of being able to hold an idea, follow through to meet a goal is what is really tough for people. Certainly for me.
Did you find that to be less challenging in the creative arena?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's interesting. I was on the train up here today. I was sort of thinking, how sort of I fell into becoming a film director. I didn't fall into it. I fought very hard to get into it. But it's actually the perfect job for somebody who has ADHD because ADHD means that you need quite a lot of stimulation and you get not bored, but you need that dopamine hit. And so what I do when I'm making a film, I break it down it's like a life hack. I break it down into separate tasks. So when I get slightly not bored, but I zone out on one task, I can go into another part of the same project. So I might do script writing for an hour. And then when I find myself drifting off or I've lost my hyperfocus, I'll start storyboarding or I'll start talking about the structure or locations with my team. Where are we going to film? So you can always go to a different part of the project. So it keeps the variety, but it's all going for the same goal. So it's kind of almost the perfect industry for people who are neurodiverse in that way.
Yeah, it makes tons of sense. There was actually a question that I wanted to ask you, but it was in a different arena, but I'll ask it now. In that kind of context, do you find it difficult to be context switching? Even though they're all kind of part of the same project, let's say, do you find there's any tax that you have to pay as a result of going from script writing to talking logistically with the team about like location? Because just for, I guess, to add a little bit to that, the reason why I say that is like my version of this is business, right? Like I feel like business is the perfect playground for a lot of people when it comes to having this brain type as well, because you have dopamine on tap everywhere. There's always problems to solve, and likewise, there's the marketing, the delivery, all these other areas and projects that you can work on. But I recognize for like my clients that when they do jump around quite a lot, they seem to lose efficiency and it is taxing for them. Just curious if you have that experience in the creative pursuit.
I think it is. I think it's very taxing going from one thing to the other. I think it's a balancing act because, I mean, starting a task, we'll talk about that because that's a whole other ball game. But once you get into a task, trying to keep that task going to a point where you've achieved something within that task, abandoning it before you've sort of hit a milestone is really unproductive. And I think in that sense, you need to block your time. I sort of block my time. If I've got a day where I've got no meetings, but I know I've got certain things I have to achieve, I'll do 2 hours. So I think they've got to be good chunks. But that's the thing, to start the task and get into it, you need to get rid of all those distractions. You need to put your noise cancelling headphones on. You need to clear your desk. You need to make sure your phone's on silent. You need to put on that rhythmic, well, for me, I put on rhythmic house music because I can really focus. So you need to set up all these things in order just to operate, which is taxing. It's time consuming. And you have to do that for every single one of your tasks, unless it's with a team, in which case it's easier. So yeah, I think make sure those blocks are long enough and give yourself time to actually start the task. I mean, people with ADHD, starting the task is often the hardest thing because once you're into it, there's momentum and you sort of get on with it. So I think starting the task for me is probably the hardest thing. And I'm sure for a lot of people who are watching this as well.
Absolutely. And to your point, before we go on to the art of starting, I totally agree as well. Like I'm yet to meet a person who has seen success when they have a brain that's similar to ours with the rigid time blocking, where it's like the increments of 15 minutes or an hour. I actually find that it has an adverse effect for a lot of people, and it just has this domino effect of guilt that starts to take place and lands with them when their head hits the pillow at night. And it ends up actually creating less work because they're agonizing over the fact that it's taken them so long to get a certain task done. And I also believe as well that the danger here is that whole system is predicated on someone's ability to be able to manage time. which is not something that typically people with ADHD are great at. We have like time blindness, or a lot of people experience that, should we say. But I'm very much aligned with you, where I have a slight nuance on that, which is the context bucketing. I have like big blocks of time, or even days for myself, where I have Mondays and Fridays, which are my like maker days. And then I have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which are my like delivery days and like working in the business. And even just doing that, where they're really big blocks of time, they're like 10 to 12 hours within a single context, that's been like game changing for me.
Yeah, so you sort of learn that structure and you put it into your life. And I do the same thing, in the sense, if I know I've got a really demanding, complex task to do, I'll schedule it for the evening, for at night. So once my kids have gone to bed and everyone's gone to bed, I'll do what you're not meant to do. I'll have a cup of coffee, which is a sin.
The dangerous man.
I'm scheduling to work from 11 till 3, and I will work solid from 11 till 3. I can't do that more than once a week, because it knocks you out. And there's a penalty to pay the next day or the next 2 days. But what I get done in that complete hyper-focused time is very, very productive. So is that a life hack I would recommend? Probably not. But it works for me because I find that when you've got kids and a family, you can't work at home when everyone's come home from school. So you have to wait till everyone's gone to bed.
See, I find that really interesting. I think like society as a whole puts a lot of like labels on what is good and bad. And like we have ascribed that because of those hours to be bad and like a bad time to work. But I remember when I first started studying this, because I've always had like struggles with sleep, and I've now come to realize that is, again, a very common thing with people with this brain type. And our kind of internal body clock is typically like slightly later than a lot of people as well. Like most people resonate with being more of a night owl than an early bird, and that's certainly myself at least. But I would feel guilty for not getting up at 5 a.m. because that's what you're told to do online, and then feeling like I had this surge of energy come 11 o'clock at night when everybody else is asleep, and like my mind finally can like really just focus on one task. And I think there is no right or wrong. I think it's like if you find your system, obviously we have to account for the variables like children and what you have got on the next day or whatnot. But there's many people, when I was looking into this, I think Thomas Edison is one of them, who is very well documented that someone like him, or a lot of these quote unquote geniuses that were very innovative, did all of their best work whilst everyone was asleep in the middle of the night.
And I think it says, apparently there's 3 body clocks genetically. There's people who get up and go to bed at a regular hour, then there's the early birds, and then there's the night owls. So there are actual genetic body clocks. So I think you're probably right, people who have got ADHD or dual presenting neurodiversity with autism, they are, often night owls. And it may be that's just, there's probably a study on it somewhere. We were talking just then about doing one thing for a period of time, which I think is really important. I was reading a book a few years ago called Limitless, and it's by a guy called Jim Kwik. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, so I've got the audiobook because audiobooks are easier. There's one really memorable bit in it where he talks about the fact that in this society we live in, there's so many distractions, so many inputs. It's relentless, that you just need to do one thing at a time. You can't do 2 things well.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in that. There's a lot of people who will try and do 2 things at the same time. But to do something to a really high standard, to the level, and to do it well, I think you need to do one thing at a time. And to do that, you need to shut off all the distractions. And there are so many distractions. On the bus up here today, I was doing some work, and in front of me, in the chair in front of me, there was a guy on Instagram, and he was scrolling like this. It's the infinite scroll. And I was trying not to it wasn't even my phone, and I was distracted. And he scrolled for 2.5 hours. And I was reading that guy who came up with infinite scroll as a Raskin. And, it's used by everyone. I think he says it's 200,000 man hours or human hours are wasted every minute from his infinite scroll invention. And he's actually tried to right his wrong. He's set up his own group now to try to sort of make sure technology is used for humans' betterment rather than, degradation. And those scrolling things are really to get our attention. So I think we've got that to contend with, and that's just your iPhone. There's everything else. So I think turn off your electronics if you're trying to do something is hard. And, I think a lot of people are sort of joined at the hip to their phone,
Everything is so accessible, just all of the time. in every capacity possible. And I think, our brains are naturally craving stimulation and almost distraction, if you want to call it that, at a baseline. So it feels like this constant tension and wrestling with your environment or your phone or someone else or whatever it may be to try and keep yourself on the straight and narrow. And one of the best realizations, I guess, which is super simple when you just break it down, that helped me to understand really where I was going wrong with trying to focus more, was that whenever I was trying to focus more, I was adding more things in. And that's how I was trying to get into a better state of focus. So what supplements can I take? What apps can I use? What software can I use? So it's all of these things that were getting added into the mix. When actually I remember hearing that focus is just a subtraction of everything else that isn't the thing. And I was like, that makes tons of sense. But I'd never thought of it like that. And as soon as I did, I then realized that it's all about removing as opposed to adding in. So for me now, I have become significantly more productive, for lack of a better word. My output has gone up with less effort required and wrestling required. And I believe that's because everything gets pushed through this lens of how much can I remove? How simple can I make it? How much friction can I just remove from my environment? Like you say, having a clean office, whenever even just sleeping, no screens are allowed in my bedroom. So it's I've just removed the option by making it simpler. So for me, that was just a really good insight that was a penny drop moment where it was okay, I'm actually thinking about this wrong. I don't need to add more things in. I actually need to take everything else away that isn't the task that I'm actually trying to focus on.
And I think that simplicity is where our brains need to be pulled towards. One of the things I've learned over the years, and I'm a great lover of Tony Robbins, the life coach guru, and I've read one of his books or listened to one of his podcasts a few years ago, and in it he says, we've all got these very long to-do lists. Some of them have got 30 things on it, and when we're ticking them off, we feel like we're achieving something. But you could tick off almost all of them and not achieve anything towards your goals. And I think it's looking at that list going, what are the 3 things on that list which are actually going to make change in where I want to get to in the project or the career move you're trying to do? And it might be family, it might be work. And that's what I do it every day now. I have my long list. And then I take 3 things and I put them at the top and I work on those 3 things. And I might do an hour on one, 2 hours on another. They're generally related, those things. And what I find, because of ADHD, if you do 2 hours on one, 2 hours on another, and 2 hours on the third thing, you'll make these really good connections. That's why our brains are so brilliant, because we connect things. And so often going from one task to another, as long as it's, a good session, you connect. And then the sum of all of those connections becomes, something greater than the sum of those 3 things. So
I love that. Cool. And that's such a creative way, non-linear way to look at it as well, which, as you say, is the beauty of having this brain type, which I'd imagine has lent well with the work that you do. And it's like chicken and the egg. Have you gone to the work that you've done because of the brain you have, or the other way around? Question that I wanted to circle back round to, because we didn't touch on it, and I think there will be a ton of utility on it for everybody listening: the difficulty of starting. That is where there is so much friction for most people in general. It's the ability to actually engage with a task that they know they should be doing. This is probably the most common phrase that I hear in my DMs and from clients. I know what I need to do. I just can't make myself do it consistently. What's your advice to anyone that maybe is feeling that, or at least through your own experience, how have you maybe combated that?
I think the first thing is, if you find it hard to start something, don't beat yourself up, because it's not your fault. It's the way your brain is wired. And they've done recent studies and they've looked at something called working memory. And working memory is when you can take an idea, work out what to do, and take it towards a goal. And people with ADHD really struggle with that. It's actually one of the main factors in executive dysfunction, which is the ability to carry out tasks. And also, if you get new information, it's updating that and feeding that into the goal. And that's why my wife says to me, you've got a brain like a goldfish. She can tell me something I meant to do with the kids, and 5 minutes later, I've totally forgotten. And I'm trying to explain to her that my brain is slightly different. But it is very difficult for, I think, for neurotypical people to often understand that we just can't hold those sort of short-term memories like other people. And I think in order to navigate that, you need tools, and you need to have visual tools so you're reminded what to do. Starting the task itself, as I said earlier, for me, I just have to get rid of all the distractions. And I have to force myself. It's hard, and you train yourself. I'd say it's the hardest thing for someone with ADHD to actually start a task. Get rid of all the distractions, put on your music, shut the doors, turn everything off. And then you know what the task is. I often put in front of me visual elements which will feed into the task. So if I'm writing a script, I'll put pictures of the characters or the landscapes. And so you start to get excited about the task because the ADHD brain needs stimulus. So provide things within that task which will get you excited. And then you'll get pulled into it. You sort of get pulled into the task. So for me, I think it's making the task fun. And because if something's fun, you'll fall into it.
That's really interesting. I've not actually thought about that as to how I could integrate that into my practice, let's say, and what it is that I personally do. I could imagine that there's tons of ways that you could likely do that, like you say with the character, or you could create, even if you haven't actually got a visual of the character yet, you can like even just the sketch of it or an idea or a pinboard of like a set or something. Just thinking of ways in which that I could incorporate stuff like that into my own life, into business. And a lot of the people that are listening will also benefit from doing that as well.
There's a piece of music that gets you going, gets you moving and grooving. Put it on and just feel the music, and then you'll get in the mood to do something. So often that, for me, is at the start, is a piece of music.
I'm going to ask a selfish question, because what you just mentioned about working memory is likely one of the biggest challenges that I face when it comes to like navigating having an ADHD brain, especially like running 3 businesses and having a fiance and trying to upkeep somewhat of a social life. The way I almost like visualize it myself is I have a bucket and the water goes into said bucket. However, there is a hole in the bucket. So water going into the bucket is the information that I'm trying to retain. The bucket itself is my working memory. By the time that I have finished pouring water into the bucket and I get around to using the water in the bucket, the water is no longer there. And that's kind of how I feel all the time, is that I'm like, this is a really important piece of information. Maybe I've read something in a book and I'm like, cool, that would be really helpful for that conversation that I'm going to have with Nick tomorrow. I have to be incredibly intentional with my capturing process of that. Otherwise, there is just not a chance in hell, no matter how insightful or how much of an impact that piece of information made to me, I know I'm not going to remember that tomorrow. And that's something I'm constantly wrestling with, because I've got this tension where I'm always learning. I'm constantly having amazing conversations with people like yourself. I'm coaching 6 and 7 figure founders on a daily basis. So I get to see inside of their businesses, you know, all of the podcasts, the reading, etc. So I have a library's worth of knowledge at my hands. The ability to then take that knowledge and utilize it is where I found it to be challenging. Have you figured out any little hacks for yourself where you're able to bridge that gap between the working memory challenges that we face and using that water in the bucket?
Well, I've got quite involved in sort of AI tools recently. And one of the things I've done, every document, every note I've ever taken, I've started to commit into a very sort of organized filing system, which is not easy, being slightly disorganized, but my autistic side has managed to sort of get me in the organizer. There's sort of like a tug of war in my brain, but I've created this sort of memory vault of everything I've ever done creatively. And I'm starting to commit that into as an AI sort of mind map it's a system called Obsidian. There's plenty on the market. I've got this wonderful device. This little thing here is the side of a credit card. There's a few companies that do them. Every conversation you have, you just press record and it records it for you. It automatically sends it to my phone, where an AI app transcribes it, orders it into thoughts. And this automatically goes onto my home mind map system. So everything I ever say, do, any conversation I have is recorded for all time. Because like you, I have this great fear of losing information. Up until this, I have pieces of paper everywhere, notebooks everywhere with notes of stuff jotted down. This has changed that. This has organized my sort of chaotic world into proper notes. And then, you know, if I want to recall something now, I work with Claude Code, or ChatGPT has access to that vault of information, and it's all starting to be joined up. I'm actually building something called Nick OS at the moment, which will be almost my own operating system, which sort of helps me run all of my projects, all of my memories across multiple platforms. So yeah, and a few people are doing this, and I've noticed there's a few people with ADHD who are starting to use these tools. So I think we're in a very lucky time that AI is sort of making life easier for us.
I totally agree. And without getting too techie for the listeners, because I can geek out on this all day.
Yeah.
This is something that I've also been doing. So I've got like my Hunter Brain HQ and like Jack OS as well. And I, funny enough, use Obsidian too.
Yeah.
So for those that are listening that are curious about what this is, Obsidian is essentially a local place for me to have a second brain. And same for yourself, right? Where I'm distilling like daily notes, just my thoughts, all my book notes, like, because I did that anyway, but I didn't actually then utilize any of that information like you. It's like if I write, let's say how many people like actually just write notes down on Post-it notes. It's like, that's great, but you have to remember where the Post-it note is and there's no recall. Whereas, as we're saying here, if I document a note inside of my Obsidian vault, I can then use something like Claude Code to be like, what was that thing that I wrote down 2 weeks ago? I think it was kind of something like this, and it'll be able to recall it and then work with me to be able to see how I want to utilize that information. So like I've really found a ton of benefit in using, I think, AI just in general to be a thinking partner and to outsource my executive function on certain tasks.
I totally agree. And I'm at the moment, I've just started this new project where I'm building it's a financial AI superintelligence. Just the quick story, 75% of retail investors, just ordinary people, lose money when they buy stocks and shares. There's plenty of places selling you the idea of buying stocks and shares, but there's very little support for inexperienced investors. So I've created this thing called George AI using Claude Code and sort of 10 years of investment experience. And I'm very much using it's a very complicated build. And for me to remember where I've got to, Claude writes a memory file every day. So when I come in and I start building the next day, it goes, "You've done this, sir, so far. Where do you want to pick up? Or we're going to do these 3 points." So for me, AI is almost the short-term memory that I don't have, which is brilliant, you know?
It's like, what a time to be alive.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Right? The ability to be able to use tools like that, like I say, outsource the elements that we naturally find difficult. Like a large portion of my time is spent trying to get the natural things that I struggle with off my plate so I can just be positioned in what I believe to be my area of genius, because that's where I feel like I have the biggest impact and I also have the most fun. And the ability to even just be able to do that now with what is technically cheap labor for now, whilst the tokens are cheap, is phenomenal. Because trying to orchestrate that 20 years ago, 50 years ago would have been a nightmare, because when you then, what would the alternative have been? Staff. But then what that means is we are now in a position of managing staff, which I think that a lot of people with this brain type find difficult. So I find it incredibly interesting. I think we are in an amazing time.
I think you touched on staff there, because up until AI, you know, if I'm out on a film crew or a shoot and I'm working, you know, with a team trying to, you know, create a complex scene, you're very much reliant and surrounding yourself by really organized people who know what they're doing, so you can focus on being a director, in my case, or whatever your business is. Now, you know, you might not have the right people around you as well, depending on whether you have the choice in hire. Normally I do. I've worked with very talented people. But now you can surround yourself by the staff that are not even there, AI staff, which is extraordinary. So, you know, navigating life as someone who's neurodiverse, family life, having children is really challenging. I won't sugarcoat it. Our brains are not easy to live with. We're hard to predict. We're spontaneous. We don't tidy up, and then we do tidy up in a sort of hyper-focused, mad way. You know, I sometimes will plan a day with the family, and an hour later, I'll go, "Let's go to the beach." And it's just out of the blue because I'm being spontaneous, and that's really hard to live with. So I think the other key thing is surrounding whoever is your life partner, or, you know, if you're lucky enough to find your life partner, that's a really key choice. And finding someone that will have you.
Yeah, agreed. I'm very blessed to have my fiance that is not neurodivergent. However, the yin to my yang is like very like calm, patient, and understanding of the chaos that naturally comes with my brain. So I'm eternally grateful for her. And I've also recognized, like, if we're being transparent, that after being single for a long time prior to being with her, my life is significantly better. since she's been in it, for obviously a number of different reasons. But if we're talking like strictly like my output and my ability to like get better results from my life, like I find that's the case because she acts as like really important scaffolding and support that was not present for me beforehand. And I didn't realize how much I struggled with that at the time. But now looking back, I'm on the other side of that and I see what the support looks like.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head with the word scaffolding because, you know, at home, my wife is the one who has the timetable of what the kids are doing every day of the week. She tells me where I'm meant to be. And, you know, I think, you know, the last 20 years would be very different if she hadn't been in my life. I don't want to think how things would have turned out.
I hear that. I totally hear that. Now, while we're on the topic of family, talk us through the story of how you actually came to recognize and have an inkling that your brain was an ADHD brain and an autistic brain.
So I suppose it kind of started through my career. I've had definite difficult times, normally on a film set or if I'm away with a crew, where, you know, people have thought I'm being rude or direct or antisocial, and me not realizing it, me not sort of picking up the social cues, me getting so hyper-focused that I drive my team too hard. You know, they all want dinner. They're sort of end of the day. And I'm like, no, we've got to keep going, get the shot. And that's hyper-focus sort of mixed in with sort of obsession. And it's and lack of awareness, not picking up the social cues. And so I've had some situations which have been very hard to deal with in my career. And they sort of stack up and you start to realize when people sort of imply there's something wrong with you. And so I've got a son and we noticed he was struggling a little bit in certain situations. And I think because of what had happened to me, I realized that he may be neurodiverse. I started reading about things because you get enough feedback in your life and you start to ask a lot of questions. So I started reading books. And as soon as I started reading books about it, it was like a light bulb went off. So there's this one book called Why Can't I Just Enjoy Anything? By a guy called Pierre Novellie, and he's actually a stand-up comedian, rising sort of talent. And he wrote this book about sort of his realization and diagnosis of autism. And I listened to that book and it was really traumatic because everything in there I sort of recognized in myself. And I kind of went through this weird revelation as I was listening to the book. But what it made me realize was that my son was wired like me, had a similar brain to me. And so what I wanted to do was make sure he had a formal diagnosis. So he would get the support because the support is there now. We went through a full clinical diagnosis, you know, which is very involved. You're working with clinicians and psychologists, going through a lot of questions and observations. And through that process, in all of the questions and all of the sort of examination, it totally cemented and clarified that my brain was the same as my son's or very similar. And it confirmed everything. And so in a way, it was quite nice because I felt like I was going through it while understanding my son more. And it's been great for him because he's now got the support that he needs and the understanding and realization he needs to sort of navigate having ADHD and autism. So it was hard. I mean, and this wasn't very long ago either. So, but it's made a big difference, I think, in our family life, in my career life, that I now, when you know what you are and there's a sort of formal label on it, it helps you address it and navigate it so much more because you know what tools you need. If you don't quite know what you're dealing with, it's hard to address the issues that come with it. And I shouldn't say they're not issues; they're shortcomings. I always think they're shortcomings of the world around us because the way our brains are wired is extraordinary. It's brilliant. It's how we can do the things we do as creatives and as business people. But we need to surround ourselves with like-minded people and frameworks that get that sort of understand that.
If you're happy to do so, I'd be really curious in those two domains to dig a little bit deeper as to like what you actually felt changed off the back of getting the diagnosis. Because a lot of people have a mixture of feelings. Some people are filled with grief. Some people feel indifferent and they're like nothing changed. You mentioned kind of personal life, maybe family life, and then the professional life. because they're two very different contexts. I'd be curious, like just how it did change for you. And let's start with the family.
Family life, I think it was just because, you know, you get a lot of support material. And so you read about it and you realize, I think when something's got a sort of formal label, you realize how to navigate it. So I think it made us, and certainly with my son, you know, you understand how to deal with those very strong emotions that come with neurodiversity, how to sort of find those timeouts, how to sort of navigate what are often very flashpoint moments in emotion within a family. So I think that helped a lot. Certainly from my point of view, the profession of filmmaking, even though it's full of, you know, a lot of neurodiverse people, I think it's still got a long way to go in being transparent and open. So I wouldn't say it's something that I've revealed to the filmmaking guys I work with. So I've still got probably a long way to go in being transparent in my industry. Certainly the realization for me was hugely emotional, because you look back at all those really difficult times you've had, often in team environments or when you're doing something creatively, and you think there's something massively wrong with you, even going back to school where I had, you know, problems. So there's a sort of, I guess it is a kind of grief. You sort of, it's a sort of almost forgiving yourself for being so hard on yourself, you know?
By you experiencing that, do you think that's helped or influenced the way that you're helping your son to navigate his diagnosis at this point as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a sort of, it's almost like we're navigating it together in a way. So, and that's the greatest thing you can do, is support your child. And you know, we have an education system that is sort of one size fits all. It's getting better, but I think it is very difficult for kids with ADHD and autism to sort of navigate, you know, these big sort of old-fashioned school environments. But the support is definitely improving.
Agreed. I think equally, there's many things that hopefully will continue to develop, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, for everyone involved rapidly. Yeah. My little sister, she's like latter years of secondary school, has recently been diagnosed with autism, and in doing so has now started to receive the support that she likely needed from such a young age. It's obviously a shame that it's taken this long to get to that point where she's in her final year, but even the relief that's kind of provided her at that point in her journey has been tremendous. So we hope that long may it continue and to speed up. Question I'd love to ask you is around where you believe that your brain has been a genuine asset to you over your creative career.
I would say all the way through. I mean, you know, any sort of process that I'm trying to come up with, making a film, you know, I used to do a lot of music. Now I'm building a sort of super intelligence AI app. I think the ADHD, I've kind of got this dual brain. The ADHD allows me to connect things. It allows me to be interested in lots of different things. I have to rein that in. So it doesn't become this sort of chaotic scattergun approach. And that just takes time and tools, some of them we've talked about. So for me, the ADHD is almost the connector of ideas, and the autism is the obsession to follow through and get hyper-focused on those ideas. So they're almost opposites, but they work together in this kind of way, and I can feel them tugging. It's weird.
That was something I was going to ask, because I'm unsure as to whether I do or I don't. I've not actually explored it a great deal myself, only just like the ADHD element for now. But I find that I'm really curious to almost like have a peek inside of your brain as to what I would imagine is this constant tension, because in some cases they feel contradictory.
They do. And I think when you have ADHD, I mean, autism and ADHD have a lot of crossover. Where autism is slightly unique is the social inputs, the lack of sometimes understanding social cues, which has got me into trouble in the past, where I'm not reading the room, and the room is saying we need to go home now and have dinner, and I'm like, no, we need to do the shot. And so it takes hyper-focus to an obsessive level, to a destructive level sometimes. And so that's when autism, and abandoning it, if you're in the middle of doing something, can be really uncomfortable for you as an autistic brain. And so I think that's when you need to sort of navigate it. So I've again gone off on a tangent. What was the question?
That's totally fine. That answers the question. It was just more a curiosity around like that tension between the two.
Yeah.
But I think you've answered it great. Now, we've really touched on some tactical and practical things, but I'm curious to dive into that again because you have really seemed to be a fountain of knowledge, and I know you've got some things on that desk over there.
I've lost my glasses. There we go. No, I wanted to talk about a book. We were discussing earlier the sort of the emotion of realizing that you're wired differently, your brain is different, and I like all people, I sort of went online and grabbed every book I could and listened to every book I could. And there was a really good book called How Not to Fit In, which is about autism and ADHD. It's written by Jess, Joy, and Charlotte Meir. And they have a little community and podcast as well. But How Not to Fit In was brilliant because it tells the story of, and they became friends, tells the story of them both navigating their early childhood all the way through education until they met each other and they suddenly had their support, and how they've navigated their professional careers. And it is anyone who's sort of feeling alone and sort of not understanding where their life is going and how they're feeling, read that book because it is a fantastic companion. It makes you feel like you're not on your own, basically.
Do you have someone in your life that acts as that for you?
I think my wife, she understands me. I drive her bonkers, but yeah, she understands me, and she knows sometimes I just have to go off and be on my own, and she gets that. So
nice. Yeah, I love that. And you've been a part of some phenomenal productions and sets. I am extremely curious as to how they don't overwhelm you to the point where you're in bed all day, because they seem, as someone who is naive and ignorant to them from the outside, like there is just so many moving parts.
It's a really good question, and I think overwhelm and burnout are two things which are really challenging. And I would say, if I'm out on a shoot and I've got a team around me, if we're shooting plates for the dinosaurs or a documentary team, or if we're recording a voiceover, we just did one with Morgan Freeman, lovely man, but you're working in this creative space. You've got multiple inputs. You're having to talk and communicate with multiple people and operate on a creative level too. And that's hugely demanding for a sort of neurodiverse brain. And I would say at the end of the day, I'm absolutely done. And the thing is, most crew members at the end of a shoot, they want to go out and have a beer and chill out and have a meal. I just want to be on my own. I just need to decompress because I've become overwhelmed, and so I definitely have been sort of, why hasn't it gone to his hotel room? And but it's because I'm completely overwhelmed. And once I've sort of decompressed, I'll try and join the crew and so forth. So I would say you need to be aware of it, and you can't do something that intense for too long without a break. So I think I build into my filming schedules times where I know I can go for a run. Or I'll get up really early and I'll go for a half an hour run, or I'll do one in the evening. And I would say the number one tonic or cure for overwhelm is universal, and it's exercise. It always has been for me. And even if it's just a 10-minute run or a cycle, some press-ups and sit-ups in your hotel room if you're away, it sorts you out. And it's because of the release of endorphins. They reset those sort of mind loops that you get into. So yeah, exercise is universally the best cure.
Totally agree. I beat this into my clients every single week. Movement is the gateway to regulating your brain.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I sweat before I work, no matter how much I sweat or how long, it doesn't matter. It's like I need to sweat a little bit before I get to work. And the difference in how I'm then able to navigate my day, handle adversity, everything, like think clearly, critical thinking, creativity, like it all just goes through the roof. So yeah, for me, that is one of my like daily vitamins, I call it, that is just a total non-negotiable. Now, I've got couple of quick fire-ish questions that I'll just throw your way that I'm curious about. Over the last 20 years, what are you most proud of from your professional career?
Not being fired more. Because I definitely have been this close to being fired quite a few times. So I've managed to negotiate not being fired quite a lot. And that's a really weird answer, isn't it? But in the sense of earlier on, before I really knew how I was wired, I wasn't very good at navigating certain situations. So, holding on to my job, I'm quite proud of.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I like that. I like it a lot. And what does success look like for you in the next 5 years?
I'd say it. I mean, I've got film projects I'm developing. I've got this app. I'm a tech founder now, I guess. But for me, success is family. It's all about my family. I want to see my kids to grow into healthy, confident young boys, and continue to have an amazing relationship with my wife. So, yeah, for me, it's about family and preparing my kids for what is a very fast changing world. And it's a scary world in the fact that climate change and the pace things are moving. So, yeah, I just want to make sure they're prepared. And, the AI world we're living in, we don't know where that's going. It's moving so fast. What's going to happen with the jobs market? I don't know. So I just want to make sure that they're equipped, really, both sort of for jobs and also mentally, and sort of, yeah.
And if there was a version of you sat next to you that was 20 years younger, who didn't know what you know now, is there anything that you'd like to say to him?
That's a hard one. You're going to get me going now. I would say if I could go back 20 years and talk to, or even 30 years and talk to young Nick, I would say there's nothing wrong with you. Because for a long time, I thought there was.
What would that do for him if he was to hear that?
I think it would give him more confidence. I think to know, I mean, it's a really hard one because back then there wasn't the awareness and the understanding that your brain wasn't the problem. It was the world you're in surrounding you that is the problem, the understanding of your brain. So I think, kids that are sort of growing up now are luckier because they have the support, even though we need to talk about it and we need to push harder. So workplaces and schools are even more informed. But I think, going back and just sort of saying, just be you and be happy with it. I think there's a lot of pressure when you're young that you're trying to be someone else. And it's harder now because of social media. Everyone's trying to be like the Instagram or the TikTok video. And that's all just noise. Just be you. And one thing, I think David Attenborough, I was very lucky to work with a few years ago. He does every day, I think he just sits in nature for 10 minutes, whatever, just to ground yourself. And I think that's really important certainly when you have a neurodiverse brain to meditate, to just be with the planet, sit in the garden, any green space you can find, listen to the trees, listen to the world around us. We are tiny little ants stuck on a planet spinning through the blackness of the vastness of space. We're insignificant, but we're incredible. And just to get that perspective, don't get drawn into all of this crazy social media stuff because it doesn't mean anything. Be true to who you are. And I think being true to who you are, you have to connect with the planet.
And if people have enjoyed this episode today and they want to carry on the conversation, where can they find more of your work?
I have a little website. You can track me down. It's called tellthestory.tv. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nick Shoolingin-Jordan. So just Google me, you'll find me.
Amazing. And all of those will be in the show notes for everybody to have quick access to. But Nick, thank you for being on the podcast today. And thank you to the listener. And I will be back to speak to you all very, very soon.